You can't stay open forever, the night manager warned, but Grace Mitchell didn't listen. At Portland's Corner Grill, she'd just served her last customer when fate rolled in, literally. A boy in a wheelchair, shivering in the rain, while a mysterious black SUV watched from across the street. What happened next would change not just her life, but the entire city's future. If you believe a single act of kindness can transform lives, type Grace in the comments. Let's see how many still believe in the power of doing good. The rain intensified as Grace approached the window. The boy couldn't be more than 12, his wheelchair barely visible beneath a soaked blanket. Her mind flashed to the manager's warning about closing time, but her heart had other plans. "Hey there," she called, opening the door. "You must be freezing." The boy looked up, startled. Blue eyes met hers, filled with a mix of fear and something else. Pride, maybe. "I'm okay," he mumbled. "Just waiting." Waiting for what? Grace glanced at the black SUV, now barely visible through the downpour. Something felt off. "My dad," he said, his voice small against the storm. "He's coming back." Grace had heard that line before, too many times in her decade of late-night shifts. She knew what coming back usually meant in this city. The neon sign above flickered, casting shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion in his young features. "Well," she smiled, already holding the door wider, "let's wait inside where it's warm. I make a mean hot chocolate." The boy hesitated, but another gust of wind made the decision for him. His wheelchair squeaked as he tried to maneuver it over the threshold. Grace noticed his fingers, red and stiff from the cold, struggling with the wheels. "May I?" she asked gently. When he nodded, she guided his chair inside, the warmth of the diner enveloping them both. The aroma of fresh coffee and grilled cheese filled the air, and for a moment, the howling storm outside seemed distant. In the window's reflection, Grace caught a glimpse of movement in the SUV. A shadow shifted, then stilled. Someone was definitely watching. But why? Inside the corner grill, Grace's practiced hands moved swiftly. Within minutes, she placed a steaming mug of hot chocolate, topped with whipped cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon, in front of the boy. "I'm Grace," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "And you are?" "Luke," he replied, his eyes fixed on the swirling cream. "Luke, BL," he stopped abruptly, as if catching himself. "Just Luke." Grace noticed the hesitation, but didn't push. Instead, she watched as he took his first sip, a small smile breaking through his guarded expression. "This is amazing," he whispered, a chocolate mustache forming above his lip. "Dad usually just gets the packaged kind. My grandmother's secret recipe." Grace winked. "Works better than any medicine for cold nights." She paused, studying his worn wheelchair. "Speaking of cold, that chair could use a towel. Mind if I?" Luke shook his head, and Grace grabbed a clean towel, gently drying the wheelchair's handles and wheels. As she worked, she noticed the chair's brand, Blackwood Medical, top-of-the-line equipment that cost more than she made in a year. "You must be hungry, too," she said, straightening up. "How about some grilled cheese?" Another family secret. "I don't have any money," Luke admitted, his shoulders tensing. "Good thing I wasn't asking for any," Grace replied, already moving toward the kitchen. In the reflection of the chrome coffee maker, she caught another glimpse of the SUV. Its engine was running now, exhaust visible in the cold air. As she prepared the sandwich, she heard Luke humming softly, a classical piece she vaguely recognized. His fingers moved in precise patterns on the table, like he was playing piano. "Mozart?" she asked, returning with the golden brown sandwich. Luke's eyes lit up. "You know classical music?" "Enough to get by," Grace smiled. "Used to dream of being a pianist myself." "What happened?" "Life," she said simply, but there was no bitterness in her voice. "Sometimes we end up exactly where we're meant to be." The bell above the door chimed, cutting through their conversation. A woman in expensive running gear, completely dry despite the rain, strode in. Her blonde hair was pulled into a perfect ponytail, her smile practiced and sharp. Luke's sandwich clattered to his plate. His fingers gripped the wheelchair's arms until his knuckles went white. "Luke," Sweetheart, the woman's voice was honey smooth. Your father's been worried sick. Grace stood slowly, positioning herself between Luke and the newcomer. Something in the boy's reaction set off every alarm in her head. Funny, Grace said, keeping her voice light. You don't look like someone who's been searching in the rain. The woman's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. Victoria Parker, Mr. Blackwood's executive assistant. She pulled out a business card, glossy black, with silver lettering. And you are... Someone who doesn't leave kids alone in the rain, Grace replied. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the counter. How much? Excuse me? For the food, the hospitality. Each word dripped with condescension. Grace felt Luke's wheelchair move behind her, backing away slightly. She squared her shoulders. The food's on the house. And Luke stays until his father comes himself. Victoria's smile finally cracked. You don't know who you're dealing with. Neither do you, Grace responded, her voice steel quiet. Through the window, Grace caught Luke's reflection. His eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too. A silent plea. She'd seen that look before in her own mirror years ago. The look of someone trapped between two worlds, needing an ally. Victoria reached for her phone, manicured nails clicking against the screen. Mr. Blackwood won't be pleased. Good, Grace said, moving closer to Luke. Maybe he'll come explain himself. Across the street, the SUV's door opened. A tall figure emerged into the rain, his expensive suit immediately darkening with moisture. Even from this distance, his presence commanded attention. Alexander Blackwood entered the corner grill like he owned it. Water dripped from his tailored suit, but his presence remained undiluted. Steel gray eyes swept the diner, landing first on Luke, then lingering on Grace. Dad, Luke whispered, his voice a mix of relief and anxiety. Mr. Blackwood, Victoria started. I was just... Leave us. He cut her off, not even looking her way. Victoria's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she retreated. Grace stood her ground, one hand resting protectively on Luke's wheelchair. Your son was cold and hungry. So I observed. Blackwood's voice was deep, controlled. For 45 minutes. The implication hit Grace like a slap. You were watching? In that car. Testing, he corrected. Most people walked past him. Some took photos. 3 called social services. His eyes narrowed. Only you helped. Without knowing who he was. Without expecting anything in return. He's a child, not a social experiment. Grace snapped, anger rising in her throat. Do you have any idea what could have happened to him? I had eyes on him the entire time, Blackwood replied coolly. He was never in danger. Grace, Luke tugged at her sleeve. It's okay? Dad does this sometimes. Tests people. Blackwood moved closer, pulling out a checkbook. Name your price. Excuse me? For your kindness. Your discretion. He clicked his pen. Everyone has a number. Grace felt her hands shake. With rage or disbelief, she wasn't sure. You think you can buy basic human decency? I can buy anything in the city. Not me. Grace's voice was quiet but firm. And not the knowledge that you left your son in the rain to prove a point. Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes. Surprise, maybe respect. He tucked away his checkbook, studying her with renewed interest. You know, he said, in 15 years of running Blackwood Technologies, I've never met anyone who turned down my money. He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. Or who dared to speak to me like that. Then maybe you need to meet more honest people, Grace replied. Perhaps, he said slowly. That's exactly what I need. Which brings me to a different kind of proposition. Luke looked between them, hope dawning on his face. I'm listening, Grace said, though every instinct screamed this was about to change everything. 1 week later, Grace stood in the lobby of Blackwood Technologies, her reflection strange in the polished marble. Her waitress uniform had been replaced by a tailored navy suit, a signing bonus she hadn't asked for. The security guard who'd initially stopped her now nodded respectfully, having received a memo about the company's newest executive, Miss Mitchell. Victoria appeared, tablet in hand. Mr. Blackwood is ready. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was silent, tense. Grace could feel Victoria studying her, calculating, reassessing. The woman who tried to dismiss her with money at the diner now had to treat her as an equal, at least officially. A word of advice? Victoria said as the doors opened. Don't mistake his interest for weakness. Better people have tried. I'm not trying anything, Grace replied. That's probably what worries you. Blackwood's office was exactly what she expected. All glass and steel. Power dressed as minimalism. He stood at the window, Luke beside him in his wheelchair, both watching the city below. The morning sun caught the silver in Blackwood's hair, the same shade as his son's wheelchair. Grace. Luke beamed. Dad's showing me where we're building the new children's hospital. The one that was supposed to be luxury condos, Victoria added pointedly, her tone suggesting the billions in lost revenue. Blackwood turned, his expression unreadable. The board wasn't pleased with the change. They'll adapt. Like they'll adapt to me? Grace asked, meeting his gaze. No, he smiled slightly. They'll fight you every step of the way. That's why I hired you as my new director of corporate responsibility. Victoria's tablet clattered to the floor. Sir, that position doesn't exist. It does now. Blackwood's voice left no room for argument. Miss Mitchell proved something valuable that night. Sometimes the most profitable path isn't the most obvious one. And if the board disagrees? Grace asked, thinking of the hostile faces she'd seen in the hallway. Then you'll do what you did at the diner. His eyes met hers, a challenge and a promise. Stand your ground. Show them why I chose you. Luke wheeled himself between them, grinning. Does this mean Grace is staying? For good. Yes, Blackwood said, not looking away from Grace. If she accepts, though I should warn you, changing a company this size won't be easy. Grace thought about her grandmother's words. Sometimes kindness is a revolution. She straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of the moment. When do I start? 3 years passed in a blur of boardroom battles and midnight strategy sessions. Grace's office, once a symbol of corporate tokenism, became the heart of Blackwood Technology's transformation. Under her leadership, the company launched programs for disabled youth, established fair wage policies, and built community centers in underserved neighborhoods. Today, she stood beside Luke at his high school graduation. His wheelchair, now customized in his school colors, gleamed under the summer sun. Valedictorian, Grace whispered proudly as Luke wheeled onto the stage. Your mom would have loved this. Alex Blackwood, standing on her other side, squeezed her hand briefly. In 3 years, he'd changed too. Less the corporate titan, more the father who never missed his son's piano recitals. The Grace Mitchell Foundation, Luke announced into the microphone, taught me that true strength isn't in what you can take, but in what you can give. His eyes found Grace in the crowd. Sometimes angels wear Waitress uniforms. Later, at the celebration dinner back at the corner grill, which Grace now owned, Alex raised his glass. To the woman who taught a cynical old man about kindness, he said softly, and showed an entire corporation its heart. Grace looked around at her family, not by blood, but by choice. Luke, beaming in his cap and gown. Alex, his walls finally down. The diner staff, now paid the highest wages in the city. One act of kindness had started it all. One moment of choosing humanity over convenience. To kindness, she replied, raising her glass. The most powerful force in business. Today, the Grace Mitchell Foundation has helped over 10,000 disabled youth find employment, while Blackwood Technologies has become a model for corporate responsibility. The corner grill still serves its famous hot chocolate, though now it's free for any child who needs warmth on a cold night. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation wasn't in the statistics or headlines. It was in how one simple act of kindness created ripples that changed an entire city's heart. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button. If you believe in the power of kindness to transform lives, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to join our community of storytellers and be the first to witness more inspiring tales of courage and compassion. Remember, every revolution starts with a single act of courage. Every change begins with one person saying, this isn't right. And every story of hope like Grace's deserves to be shared. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to never miss our daily dose of inspiration. What will your act of kindness be today? Let us know in the comments below.